It's happened. Manchester United have agreed their first deal of the summer. And look, if you told me at the start of this season, when this club was in absolute chaos, when the manager situation was a mess, when nobody could agree on anything, if you told me that by June we'd have Champions League football confirmed and a midfield signing agreed before the World Cup even kicks off, I probably would have laughed. But here we are. Edison, done. 40.5 million euros fixed, rising to 45 million euros with bonuses. 4-year contract with an option for a fifth. And this is genuinely significant, not just because of who the player is, but because of what it tells us about how this club is operating right now under Michael Carrick and the Ineos recruitment team. Because think about it, the deal is confirmed before the window has even officially got going, before the World Cup, before the madness of the summer market takes over and prices go through the roof. That is calculated, that is deliberate. And if you compare that to how this club has operated in previous windows, scrambling for players in the last week of August, panic buying, getting held to ransom, the contrast is massive. I'm Bella. Welcome to Bella Mufc Analyst. And if you're as invested in this rebuild as I am, stick with me, because today there's a lot to get through and some of it is genuinely very interesting. And actually, if you enjoy this kind of discussion, if you want the analysis beyond the headlines, hit subscribe. There are a lot of people just posting news clips right now. We actually talk about what it all means. Right? Back to it. So, Edison, let's start here properly. Because I think some people are going to look at the fee, roughly £35 million up front, and they might say that's a lot for a player who had 1 year left on his contract. And I get that argument. I really do. There were reports earlier this year that Atalanta originally wanted closer to 60 million euros for him. So United have done well to get him for less. But the question people should actually be asking isn't whether the fee is perfect, it's whether the player is right. And I genuinely think he is. This is someone who has been one of the most consistent midfielders in Serie A for 4 years. He played 180 times for Atalanta in 4 seasons. Think about that consistency. He played every minute of the Europa League final when Atalanta dismantled Bayer Leverkusen 3-0. That Leverkusen side that had gone the entire season unbeaten. And Edison was immense in that game. That's the kind of big occasion mentality you can't always teach. You either have it or you don't. He has it. And the reason United need him isn't just about replacing Casemiro's legs or his energy. It's about replacing what Casemiro was supposed to be in the first place. Because let's be honest, the Casemiro that arrived at Old Trafford and the Casemiro that's leaving are 2 different players. The decline was rapid. And for a long time, that midfield has been crying out for someone who can properly control a game, someone who works across both phases. Edison does that. He scores goals too, 16 in 4 seasons at Atalanta from midfield. That is not nothing. Now, here's something I find genuinely interesting about this deal. Atletico Madrid agreed personal terms with Edison before United. They went in, they tried, but they couldn't meet Atalanta's asking price. So Atalanta held firm, United came in, matched the fee, actually exceeded what Atletico were offering, and at that point, it was done. There was no competition anymore. Which tells you something about the financial commitment United are prepared to make in this window. They didn't wait. They didn't mess around. They identified the player, agreed the fee, sorted the personal terms on a 4+1 year deal. Job done. And yes, the medical still needs to happen. The official announcement is expected in early July, but this is not a rumour. This is not speculation. Multiple reliable sources, The Athletic, ESPN, Fabrizio Romano, have all confirmed the agreement. So as far as I'm concerned, Edison is a Manchester United player. The paperwork is the formality. Right, and I know people have been talking about the shirt number situation. It is a bit of a quirky story, but actually, it's more interesting than it sounds. Because Edison has worn the number 13 his entire senior career at Fortaleza, at Salernitana, at Atalanta. It's his number. But at United right now, number 13 belongs to Patrick Dorgu, who is not going anywhere. So Edison will have to adapt. And the options that are currently free are 14, 17, 20, 27, 28 and 29. Now 17 is an interesting one. That was Fred's number. Another Brazilian, another defensive midfielder. There's something almost poetic about that if you want to go there. But I think the most meaningful option becomes available once Casemiro officially leaves, and that's the number 18. Scholes wore it. Ashley Young wore it. Bruno Fernandez wore it before switching to number 8. That's a shirt with history at this club. Whether that matters to Edison personally, I have no idea. But United fans will have opinions on it, and I'd love to know what yours is. Drop it in the comments. But let's zoom out, because Edison is confirmed, and that's the headline. But the bigger picture right now is that United aren't done. Not even close. Carrick has been clear. He needs at least 2 midfielders this summer. The Champions League is coming back. That means more games, more intensity, more demands on every department. One signing in the engine room is not enough. So who's next? And this is where the story gets properly interesting. Matteas Fernandez, West Ham United, 21 years old, Portuguese international. And here's the thing about this one that I keep coming back to. It's not just recruitment talk. Bruno Fernandes has personally told Ineos he wants this kid at Old Trafford. The club captain is lobbying for a signing. That doesn't happen all that often. And when the most important player at your football club says he thinks someone is good enough to play alongside him, you probably listen. West Ham have been relegated to the Championship. That changes everything about this negotiation, because a player of Matteas Fernandez's quality does not want to be playing Championship football. He's 21, he's a full Portugal international, he's had one of the most impressive individual seasons of any midfielder in the Premier League, despite everything that was happening around him at West Ham. This kid was outstanding in a bad team. That matters, that tells you something about the character, and now the club he plays for has gone down. The leverage West Ham had has basically evaporated overnight. Now, the fee being talked about is around £75 million, and I think that number will make some people flinch. But you have to think about what you're actually buying. You're buying a 21-year-old who is already Premier League proven, who plays the kind of forward-thinking, aggressive midfield game that Carrick clearly wants to build around, and who has a long-term future at the club. The captain wants him. The player wants to come. West Ham need to sell. At 21 with that profile, £75 million is not outrageous in this market. It might feel big right now, but compare it to what you'd be paying in August once other clubs get involved. Get it done early? And United are apparently preparing to submit a formal offer in the coming days. So watch this space. This feels like a serious one. Now I want to talk about the striker situation, because there's a subplot developing here that I think fans need to pay attention to. Joshua Zirkzee. What is happening with him? Because the reports coming out are not encouraging if you wanted him to succeed at Old Trafford. 2 goals in 26 appearances this season. 2 for a striker. That is not good enough at the level United are trying to compete at. And there is serious interest from Serie A clubs. A return to Italy feels increasingly likely. And if Zirkzee goes, United need to replace him. That's not optional. With Champions League football and potentially 50-plus games in a season, you cannot go into September with just Sesko as your senior striker option. So who comes in? Ben Jacobs, who is someone I trust on United Stories, has mentioned Igor Thiago from Brentford as a name that's on the radar. And look, you can see the logic immediately. Thiago had an absolutely stunning season. 22 Premier League goals, second highest scorer in the division behind Haaland at 24 years old. He's physically imposing, 6'3", strong, direct, brilliant in the air. He earned a Brazil World Cup call-up on the back of it. That is a significant leap in just a couple of years. But here's what I find genuinely interesting about this link. United's stated preference is for an older, more experienced striker, someone who's been around, someone who's done it at the highest level. Igor Thiago is only 24 and was playing in Bulgaria not that long ago. That's not a criticism. It's actually a remarkable story. But it does mean he's not the typical profile they're chasing. Jacobs himself said Thiago is an exception to the general approach, which either means there's something specific about him that United genuinely rate beyond his stats, or it means they'll only move for him if the right experienced option doesn't materialise first. And then there's the Brentford factor. United bought Brian Mbeumo from Brentford last summer, paid £71 million for him, including add-ons. They clearly have a good relationship with the club. But Brentford are going to be even more protective of Thiago. He's their main man now. He signed a new contract earlier in the year. And they'll be watching his World Cup performances, knowing that every goal he scores adds zeros to his price tag. Realistically, we're talking £60 million minimum, and that could climb significantly if he has a big tournament. So the striker conversation is a conditional one for now. If Xerxes leaves, United move. If he stays, they probably don't spend that kind of money in attack, but I wouldn't be shocked if Xerxes is gone before pre-season. The signs are pointing that way. Now, I want to talk about two other midfield stories. One that I think is still moving and one that I think is effectively over. Let's start with the one that's over, Carlos Baleba. Because I know this has been a saga that's dragged on for over a year. United tried to sign him last summer. They had a verbal agreement on personal terms. They went in hard. Brighton said no. And the reason Brighton said no was financial. They wanted north of £100 million. United weren't going there. And fair enough, honestly. United were not going to pay £100 million for a player who then went on to have one of the most disappointing seasons of any highly rated Premier League midfielder in recent memory. Because let's not pretend that didn't happen. Baleba was supposed to be this elite defensive midfielder with an enormous ceiling, and this season he was being hooked after 22 minutes of games. He struggled badly, and Brighton have not dropped their price despite all of that. They're still talking about fees in the £100 million range. And Ineos, to their credit, have apparently made a decision. They're not doing it. Baleba has been quietly moved off the list in favour of targets that make more football and financial sense right now. Does that mean United forget about him forever? Probably not. The personal terms are apparently still agreed in principle. The desire from the players' side hasn't gone away. But this summer, I don't see it. And I don't think many people can argue with that call given how his season went. Now, Elliot Anderson, this is a different conversation entirely. Because I think United genuinely want this one. Reports suggest Anderson is the dream signing in midfield. The one that would really excite Carrick, the one that the recruitment team believe would add something different. He's 22, he's English, he's technically outstanding, he can drive from deep, he can arrive late into the box, he reads the game brilliantly for his age. He was one of the most exciting midfielders in the Premier League before Nottingham Forest, and United have been tracking him seriously, but there are two massive complications. First, Manchester City have made an opening bid and had it rejected. City are in for him, so that's the competition. Trying to convince a young English midfielder to choose United over Manchester City right now is not a straightforward thing, especially with City's Champions League pedigree and the certainty of regular football there. The second problem is the fee. Forest are apparently asking around £120 million, which is extraordinary, which is almost certainly more than United are prepared to pay for anyone right now. So Elliot Anderson is complicated. He might happen, he might not. It depends on whether Forest move on the fee, and it depends on where Anderson himself wants to go. If United can convince him personally that this is the right project, Carrick's rebuild, Champions League football, being central to something being built from scratch, then maybe. But City being in the picture makes this genuinely uncertain. There's also a left-back situation quietly developing in the background. Luke Shaw's fitness record is a concern. If United are going into a 50-game season with Champions League football, they simply cannot rely on him being available every week. We've seen what happens when they do. Lewis Hall from Newcastle has been mentioned, but Newcastle themselves have been clear. No contact has been made. Hall hasn't asked to leave. It's very early, so that's not close. But the need is real, and I'd expect something to happen there before the window closes. William Gomez at Porto has also been linked, a winger reportedly valued at around £52 million. And there's a Hoffenheim winger called Bazumana Toure, who United are apparently pushing to sign as well, in what feels like a deeper squad option in the wide areas given Marcus Rashford's expected departure. Because that's another whole conversation. Rashford almost certainly leaving before the new season. That's a significant exit. United will need to have the right options in that position. So when you actually step back and look at what's being assembled here, it's a serious summer. Edison is in. Matteas Fernandez feels close. There could be a striker if Xerxes goes. A left-back is needed, a wide option or two. The midfield rebuild that Carrick needs to actually compete in the Champions League is coming together piece by piece. And what's different this time, what genuinely feels different compared to previous United windows, is the clarity of thought behind it. There's a vision. There's an understanding of what kind of football Carrick wants to play, and the recruitment is reflecting that. These aren't panic buys. These aren't name-for-name replacements. Edison makes United harder to play through. Matteas Fernandez adds energy, progression, creativity from midfield. That's a different kind of midfielder. That's complementary. That's building a proper midfield unit rather than just throwing bodies in and hoping it works. Last season, qualifying for the Champions League with no European football midweek was hard enough. Doing it while also competing in the Champions League itself, potentially the FA Cup, Carabao Cup, playing every 3 days in the middle of winter, that is a completely different challenge. And Carrick knows that. Ineos knows that, which is why the squad needs real depth, not just starters. You need 8 or 9 proper first-team players across the midfield and forward areas to handle that kind of schedule without falling apart in February. Look at what happened to certain clubs this season who were in Europe. The fatigue, the injuries, the results falling apart when key players were missing because there was nobody of quality to step in. United have been there before, they know what that feels like, and the determination to not repeat it is visible in how they're approaching this window. The Edison deal being wrapped up this early? That's not a coincidence, that's intentional. Get your priority targets done before the market goes crazy. Get the players you actually want, rather than settling for whoever's left. That discipline, if it continues, will define whether this rebuild actually works, because ultimately, that's the question hanging over all of this. Not whether Edison is good. Not whether Matteas Fernandez is worth £75 million. The real question is whether United, as a football club, as an institution, are capable of sustaining this kind of calculated, forward-thinking approach over multiple windows. Because that's what the clubs above them have done. Arsenal rebuilt methodically. Newcastle have been brilliant in the market. Even City, for all their resources, have a coherent squad-building philosophy. United have flirted with that idea before and then fallen back into chaos. The real test isn't this summer. The real test is whether the thinking behind this summer survives the pressure of next January, of a bad run of results, of a big name suddenly becoming available and everyone screaming to sign him. Right now, the signs are genuinely positive. The Edison deal shows a club that can move decisively. The Matteas Fernandez situation shows a club that listens to its own players and moves on good intelligence. The willingness to walk away from Baleba at an unreasonable price shows financial discipline. That combination, decisiveness, intelligence and discipline, is rare. And if United can hold on to it through an entire rebuild, then we might actually be talking about something real here. So let me ask you this, because I genuinely want to know what you think. With Edison coming in, Matteas Fernandez potentially next, and then potentially a striker if Xerxes goes, what does the dream completed midfield look like to you? Is it Edison, Fernandez and one more? Is Elliot Anderson still the one you're holding out for? Or do you think the priority should actually shift and United need to get the striker situation resolved first before the World Cup sends prices into orbit? Drop it below. I read every single comment and I'll be back with more updates as this window develops because it's only just started and based on what we've seen already, this is going to be one to watch.